we're learning during this pandemic that natural places, like the places that Alachua Conservation Trust is working to protect, are really important to not only ourselves, but to the wildlife and also to the water resources that we use every single day. Protecting these places is not only providing recreation for people that live in and around our preserves, but also providing wildlife habitat and also protecting our drinking waters.
Alachua Conservation Trust has been around since 1988, and our mission is to protect the natural, historic, scenic, and recreational resources throughout north central Florida. When Alachua Conservation Trust got started, the idea really was to ensure that there'd be green spaces into the future, that there was enough wildlife habitat in place, that there was the connectivity needed for them to thrive and survive. We have a great amount of biodiversity, some of the richest in the lower 48, and our work just is sort of by nature and need, and has sort of grown to expand and cover about 16 counties throughout north central Florida as we speak today.
We actually work in the surrounding areas, and we also work as far as the Panhandle and even the Florida Keys. We had a project come to us to protect one piece of property. That's how the organization kind of came into existence, was by protecting that property. And since then, we've grown to protect over 53,000 acres of land in Florida. And then in addition to that, we work in conservation easements, which is a way that private landowners can protect their land. It stays in private ownership. If they want to pass it on to their heirs, the conservation easement stays on the property. And we have about 4,457 acres that we've protected through conservation easement. We're working specifically in the Springs region of Florida to protect our water resources, protect our aquifer and our springs, focused on the Santa Fe River region, as well as the Ichetucknee region and the Suwannee region of our state. We're working to place conservation easements on private property, as well as to purchase conservation lands outright. We also are working in prescribed fires, introducing fire to places that we're used to it historically, but maybe haven't had fire in a while. If we're not protecting these places now, they may be developed in the future, and we've actually protected a few properties that were slated for development, and now they won't be. And we've started to expand our work into education and outreach and things like that, so we do a lot of events. And we also have 8 preserves that are open to the public that people can visit, and we have 2 more that will be opening before the end of the year. We have one preserve that does cost about $2 or $3 to get into, and that's our Rock Bluff Springs. But the other preserves are totally free. You can go out there and you can hike, you can go bird watching. We have observation towers. You can bring your dog.
I help a lot with the newsletters. Sometimes I do a little bit of grant writing. I conduct interviews, a little bit of feature stories. My dad would always take us to the Everglades and to the beach, and we would just kind of surround ourselves with those natural areas just from when I was young. So I've just always been a part of it, and I felt like it was part of my job to help protect it.
Prairie Creek is actually a really critical component to Payne's Prairie Preserve State Park. That's what probably most people know. The concept of Prairie Creek Conservation Cemetery is this place where you don't use embalming or concrete vaults or anything that's man-made. Everything's got to be able to biodegrade, basically, and people are wrapped in shrouds or in pine boxes that biodegrade. And the cool thing about it is that every burial pays for future conservation lands. And so we actually did our first acquisition with funding from people being buried out at the cemetery in 2016 and added 15 acres to the preserves. Another component of our work that's sort of happened as we've grown as an organization is we're now doing restoration. We're going in there and trying to improve that habitat, providing the most benefit both for water recharge, water quality, as well as providing habitat for wildlife species. There's a lot of ways to get involved with Alachua Conservation Trust beyond even, say, donating. So we're still having some outings where people can kind of come out and learn about that. A lot of them these days happen to be by boat, canoe or kayak, just because it's an easy place to socially distance.
It's a great way for the public to get involved. They can come out, give a few hours in helping clean up a trail or removing an invasive species. As
all nonprofit organizations, we rely heavily on private contributions. Up to a few years ago, we were 100% funded through private donor contributions and family foundations. And as we've evolved as an organization, we have gotten more funding, things like National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, U.S. Endowment, contracts with the county and water management districts, but still predominantly relying on those private dollars. Another opportunity that people can look at is donating a conservation easement on their property, giving up their development rights and sort of making sure that their property continues to be a farm or timberlands. And they can also consider donating property outright or leaving property to us, as well as maybe you have an empty lot, maybe in a neighborhood that might make a good community park. And we often use those pocket parks as places where we can have, environmental education for students. So particularly if they're close to schools, they can serve, multiple purposes.
We have an event every year called the Conservation Steward Awards, and we are always looking for businesses that are interested in sponsoring that event, whether it's through a cash donation or an in-kind donation. And we will be hosting the event next year in March. It may be digital or virtual in some format, but we are certainly going to go ahead with it. And we have some wonderful sponsors this year, and we're hoping to have some more wonderful sponsors next year.
Probably the easiest way to learn more about Alachua Conservation Trust is visiting our website, alachuaconservationtrust.org. We're also on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. To learn more about us as an organization, consider making a contribution to ACT.
It's worth protecting. It's worth keeping these places the way that they are, because we want to make sure that our children and our grandchildren and future generations get to enjoy them, and also the wildlife that depends upon them for their survival. It's really important for us to protect these places for them.